Happy Thursday and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Rocketeer Minute, where each and every day, Monday through Friday, we go over 1 minute of the greatest adventure movie Walt Disney's ever made, the 1991 Joe Johnston-directed feature, The Rocketeer. I'm one of your hosts, Jim O'Kane of TVDads.com.
And I'm Hal Bryan, an airplane nerd from the Experimental Aircraft Association here in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. So Jim, what a thrill it is for us to welcome back a remarkable guest who's willing to spend a little bit more time with us, screenwriter Danny Bilson. Danny, welcome back to the Rocketeer Minute.
Hey, thanks. Happy to be back.
It's fun, and you have joined us at one of my favorite minutes. This is the big showdown and the kind of the changing sides, simple turns, all kinds of narrative strategies that you just want to see. This is the car crash, the big the big mess at the end, and it's beautiful. And thanks for writing the words that we're hearing coming out of the mouths of all these people. It's just a beautiful dialogue.
Yeah, that line that Billy has as Cliff with flying commandos, the works. That whole thing is just the tone is just so perfect.
Is this the scene where he says, "I might be a crook, but I'm 100% American"? Is that this sequence? This scene?
We're coming. That'll be tomorrow.
Okay. Because I get a lot of questions about that line. Okay.
Oh, interesting.
We'll save that for the next cast.
I do know you've probably been whacked a couple of times about the Deutschmarks line because of where this is in history, and there weren't Deutschmarks, there were Reichmarks.
You know what? I've never been whacked until now.
Oh,
that was my first spanking on that one.
No. Well, the gloves are off now, Bilson. Sit back and listen.
Let's pull out the errata sheet. Let's see. Of all the things that has to be wrong, that's forgivable, and it worked with the crowd, and it's alliterative. It's nice, and
well, you know what's weird is that in those days there were research people who would go through scripts and look for stuff like that. And I'm surprised that no one ever caught that. I'm also surprised that we got that wrong because I'm kind of a history nut, but maybe I didn't really study the German economy until later of what happened after World War I and the devaluing of their money and stuff. Because I know it now. I think maybe at the time I hadn't learned that yet. But usually the research people would catch that. So actually it's a little disappointing.
Now I've wrecked the Rocketeer for the screenwriter of the Rocketeer. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Wow, thanks for nothing, Jim O'Kane. The show was going great until you upset the guest.
One of Hal and my mutual friend Brian Fees had written a great book called "Whatever Happened to the World of Tomorrow." It's a great graphic novel. He mentions in it the 27 men who went to the moon, and 12 of them who had walked on the surface. And I had to point out to him, I said it was only 24 because some of them went twice. And to this day, he still feels the pain of the three that he counted twice.
So you're that guy, Jim.
I feel really bad. I feel really badly because that was one of the first notes I'd ever written to him.
It's funny, though, because when Billy's on, he's always the one who calls me the flea picker, the one who's picking fleas, as he says. So. Hey, we're all among friends. We all love the details. I think that's fair to say. Danny, you talked last time we were on about kindred spirits and things. And when I look at your body of work, we talked a little bit about Zone Troopers and that movie. A lot of attention to detail in that movie. A lot of sort of the uniforms and things. Very, very well done. Dialogue, of course.
Right. I don't know if we can do a separate Zone Troopers pod, but I can tell you that I have a lot of stories about that wardrobe from Zone Troopers. Just the first time because it was all authentic stuff. It wasn't made costumes. Those were all uniforms from World War II. And I'll just say this, that because it does play in the Rocketeer in a certain way. The first time I walked through the wardrobe department and saw the rack of the Nazi uniforms with all the sort of skulls and the terror iconography all over it, it was very, very creepy.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, it was very, very creepy to see. I also want to mention that, Paul and I wrote a graphic novel in 2007 called Red Menace.
I was just about to bring that up, but please go ahead. I'm a big fan of that one.
Oh, thanks. And Jerry Ordway did a magnificent job in the detail and the research and the drawing of it. But that, to us, was our spiritual sequel to The Rocketeer, that book. It's really, it's in the same world. There's a kid who flies at the end, and the tone of it and everything. It was, excuse me, it was 1950s, but it was, that was our chance to do our sort of spiritual sequel to The Rocketeer. If not, we couldn't do a direct sequel, and we are not involved in whatever they're doing now. But that's another story. I will let you guys ask some questions.
Well, just about Red Menace very quickly. I reread it a couple of weeks ago when you and I had first gotten in touch about doing the show, and I swear I see Woolley and Fitch, just right there with all the other G-men and
except
what
then
a
we had
terrific
those,
story.
we had those sort of mutant G-men, I think is what they were, those government agents. It was all about blacklisting and that. But I'm very proud of that book, and hopefully someday we can do more with it.
Well, I would love to see a film.
Me too.
An extended, like a Netflix series or something like that would be terrific. But it was just another just beautifully toned period piece that really puts you right in the moment.
Yeah, and I never got to talk to Dave Stevens about it because he was pretty ill when it came out, and we never I never got to get his take on it because I think I like to think he would have really liked it and he would have appreciated the art because I knew he was a fan of Jerry's. So
sure. One last tiny thing. I'd made this note, and I'll kick myself if I don't mention it quickly. There was a tiny Easter egg at basically the very, very end, post-credits in Zone Troopers. So you're kind of a post-credits Easter egg hipster because you were doing it before it was cool.
Sadly, we were doing a lot of things before they were cool, like adapting comics to films, and now we're just, sitting in the old folks' home going broke, watching everybody else cash in. I'm just kidding. kidding. Yeah. We actually have some stuff in very active development right now, so that I'm excited about. But let's talk about the end of Zone Troopers, because it does relate to the Rocketeer sort of tone and things like that.
So and I'm talking about sort of that very final frame before the credits disappear. Buy war bonds available in the lobby. And you saw that at the end of every movie back then. And you were talking about as a kid growing up watching the old movies and things. And that was anything you saw during wartime. You saw the newsreel shorts at the beginning and the little public service messages. Go out in the lobby, buy your bonds. That was a brilliant touch.
Thank you.
I had a ton of fun watching the movie. Please take this as a compliment when I tell you, but that little thing was my favorite frame in the film, except maybe some of the shots of the rocket ship, which were so cool.
Yeah, and again, as I said in the last podcast, that movie had a lot to do with our involvement in the Rocketeer, because Dave Stevens understood where we were coming from, and that's how I'm sorry about that noise. Dave Stevens knew where we were coming from, and that's how the partnership really began.
I keep wondering, when you went to the premiere, of course,
yes.
Probably at the El Cap. Mm-hmm. I think it was at the El Cap.
Yeah, it was the first movie. It was actually the opening of that restored theater. Wow. So there was a huge event because it was the premiere film, and it was Disney had restored this theater on Hollywood Boulevard across from the Chinese, and they had closed Hollywood Boulevard and had an entire fair, with rides and everything. Wow. It was a big event because it was the opening of the theater and the premiere of the Rocketeer.
I just keep thinking, you worked in this for close to a decade of just trying to get this thing on the screen. When you were sitting there, I remember seeing this movie when the weekend when it came out, and I remember this particular scene as watching it as the tide turns when Eddie's alliance shifts, and his one of his henchmen turns to Rondo Hatton and says, "Relax, Frankenstein, you ain't bulletproof." I can remember that it was like a rumble in the theater, and people were like, oh, and there's that feeling, that total suspension of disbelief, that total, the audience is completely bought into this thing because you're like, what's going to happen next and what's going to happen next. When you were sitting there in the El Cap watching this with everybody else, I'm sure the audience reacted in a similar manner. Is that what you work for? I mean, besides getting paid when the thing's done,
no.
Is that the kind of thing that you hope for when you're working toward the beginning of it all? I mean,
do you mean an audience reaction for great moments in the film?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah, the whole. I mean,
yes. Of course. I mean, I think that it's the audience reaction is our reaction. When I say Paul and I, everything we do is pretty instinctive. We don't follow any templates or rules. We never really read any screenplay books. It was just, what would we want to see? What do we want to see the most? Paul and I had one writing teacher, and his name was John Milius, who of course wrote Apocalypse Now, Wind of the Lion, Conan. And we took a class with him for about 10 weeks that was an off-campus private thing in those days in this little place on Hollywood Boulevard. And that's the only writing class that we ever had. And it was very, very influential because John always said, if you're writing a movie, especially on spec, write the movie you want to see the most. And that's one of the most empowering things I ever heard. And he said a couple of other things that were very important, but 2 or 3 things that I've kept with me for my entire career. And then a few years ago, over a couple of different projects, I was able to work with John. And it's been it's been a fantastic relationship with Paul and I and John over the years. And he is our writing mentor for sure.
I see this moment, and you feel the audience with you. I mean, you must be, when you're sitting there, you're like, yeah, this is good. The audience really loves this part. Do you try to avoid reading things, like when you read reviews and stuff like that? Do you just, when reviews start to go heavily negative, do you just go through it and take it as constructive criticism, or this guy doesn't know what he's talking about? How do you generally?
No, I've always looked at reviews as, if there's something I agree with, that's good feedback. If I don't agree with it, ignore it. It's just his opinion. I mean, it's my opinion, his opinion, and nobody knows there's no right or wrong. It's just how we feel about stuff in the arts. So, reviews, it's really just a matter of, if I agree with the criticism, yeah, it'll hurt a little bit. If I don't, it doesn't.
When I'm watching this thing, as you're moving the different characters around, we have a couple of different people with different stakes in the thing. Mm-hmm. As you're scripting it, are you just mostly talking with Paul and saying, okay, what happens next, or do you act these things out to each other? I was just wondering how much of that happens.
Our process in those days, it's different now. In that we were early on computers. As soon as there was anything, we were writing on an Atari 800. I'm also a big gamer, and so is Paul. So anything we could play a game on and write on was the platform we would have. But what we did was we split 2 monitors. So he would type in those days, and then I had a monitor facing me in a chair. And our relationship in those days was, I tended to lay out most of the structure of things, and then he would do the prose and fill it out, and I would watch him type and adjust. But dialogues, we both do dialogue, and we do it together. And yes, sometimes we read it back to each other. You say it out loud. But in those days, our process was very, very slow, because we would argue over every word, and it was just absurd. Now, in the last years, since we've really been actively writing together again, we've been through a lot over the years. We've always been together, and we've always done a certain amount of writing, which is absolutely true. We've always been, even when I was a video game executive, he was the head of story at the video game companies. But now, we've been working together so long that he takes a scene, I take a scene, we'll talk, maybe I'll be driving down to work in the morning, and we talk on the phone, and we can just work out a scene really quickly, and then I'll write mine, he'll write his, we pass them back and forth, we do notes on them, and we keep moving. So now we are literally like 3 or 4 times as fast as we were back in the day, and we can write a script really fast.
Does that just come from the trust you've built up after working together for so many decades? That's terrific.
We are a singular. After 40 years, we're a singular voice. I know his bullshit. He knows. I know his stuff. He knows my stuff. He still has his peccadillos, and I'm sure I have mine. I tend to be the one who reaches for a crazy idea, and he says that's stupid, and finally I convince him that it's a great idea. I can think of certain ones, but the one, I hate to go back to Zone Troopers, but Mittens punching Hitler was one that he hated, and that I still think is one of the best ideas I ever had. But most people haven't seen that film, although I recommend it wherever you can find it.
Well, there's going to be a sudden surge on Amazon.
Yeah, there was a Blu-ray release not too long ago. That's the one that I.
Oh yeah, we did a commentary.
Yeah,
Paul and I did a commentary.
I'll be honest and tell you, so I watched it first without, but I think I'm going to need to go back and watch it again with the commentary and see what that's all about. But
I kind of remember running out of gas during that commentary. But it starts out, and I'm certain we tell a lot of stories at the beginning.
That whole movie really had and again, this is a compliment, not that it was derivative in any way, but it had a very Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos kind of vibe to it.
Well, it's wholly intentional,
and which to me is terrific. Those were even before I got into superhero comics as a kid, the comics I was reading were Sergeant Fury stuff, and
me too. So And also the films of World War II, especially the B movies.
Yeah.
So
yeah, like Battleground kind of a thing, or just
even more cheesy, because Battleground's pretty serious. The ones that were, Gee Whiz Sarge, all that stuff, and from the comics. But I don't want to take our audience too far away from the Rocketeer. Although the Zone Troopers,
they're coming with us. It's okay.
Okay.
They'll go where we tell them.
The beauty of that film, and it plays out again in the Rocketeer, is we were able to get away with that dialogue. And in Zone Troopers, when I see it now, it's the most naive, innocent film where Paul and I just did what we wanted to because there was very low risk because the money was so low. And then in the Rocketeer, again, as I said in the last podcast, it's really noticeable, that 30s dialogue, because you don't see that even in period films. Now, I don't mean films of the period. Right. I mean period films now, they won't go there, and maybe they shouldn't. But in 1990 or 91, we were able to do that, and I think it does help set some of the tone. I can tell a story about that is maybe difficult in some ways, but there's a couple things, you haven't asked me anything negative, there's a couple things that Paul and I were unhappy about with The Rocketeer. And if everybody just loves it, I don't want to do any dream crushing.
Go ahead, prove us wrong.
Exactly.
So, although Alan Arkin is a phenomenal actor and been a favorite of mine since I was a kid and Wait Until Dark, that was his take on that was not what we had in mind. We wanted William Demarest. We wanted a fast-talking 1930s guy, and he had this rhythm that was, oh, Clifford, and we were just like, what? Like when we were seeing dailies, there's a couple instances like that. Paul Sorvino also, we wanted Joe Pesci. And what you'll see from what Paul and I wanted was we wanted Howard Hawks pacing in the film.
Oh, sure.
And we couldn't get it. And there was a sequence in the Bulldog Cafe that the pacing was so slow that Joe went back and reshot it. And I'm not going to say it was because of our complaints. Maybe we needled the producers enough, and maybe there was another reason he reshot it. But when he reshot it, it was still, he never really got that Howard Hawks pace. And we thought that we wished, if there's anything I wished for that film, was that it had that energy in the dialogue scenes that he did so well in the action scenes.
Okay, I got to ask, which particular Bulldog scene is it? The Mr. Ketchup bottle part, or is
I believe it's between Cliff and Jenny, and I think it's so
the spilling of the soup and all that era.
Yes, okay. I believe it's that scene. Yeah. Again, I haven't gone back and looked at this stuff, and when I say this, let me put all that in a box, because everything else we loved, and we still love to this day. And you know what? Alan Arkin is PV, and that pace is the pace of the film, and it is what it is. I'm just talking, every writer's got a complaint, and those were ours, but now they don't matter at all, because the film transcends our little peccadillos back in the day, and I'm very proud of it. I think Joe did a great job. I will say, and maybe you all noticed this, that the most pure sequence in the film, and the film where the aspect of the film where I felt it nailed Dave's work in the comics and our adaptation of it, was the entire sequence at the airfield the first time Cliff flies. That sequence, and with Polito saying it's all part of the show, and that stuff was magic, and I think that's my favorite part of the film, because that aspect of the film was absolutely captured what Dave and Paul and I wanted to do from the beginning, which was really get the most pure adaptation of what he wrote in the books. And that was written before Paul and I wrote books with him. And that, to me, is the most successful part of the film. I think the whole film is successful, and it is the most gratifying film or thing I've ever done in my career. And the fact that it's appreciated all these years later as a Disney classic is really, really an achievement of a lifetime goal. So when I say a little negative thing, it's just a writer being a little crabby, because I just wanted to give you that perspective, because that's what Paul and I thought when it was made. But now, do we care? Not at all. We just, we really love it. I want to tell you an anecdote about how I encountered, the best encounter I ever had with people who love The Rocketeer was 2 years ago. I was invited to work at Imagineering on some blue sky work on Star Wars Land, as well as a role-playing game we did in the park called Legends of Frontierland.
Really?
What I encountered when I got to Imagineering, and at first I gave a talk there, because I've been as you may or may not know, I'm the chairman of the Interactive Media and Games Department at USC. And so I have an expertise in interactive. When I say an expertise, I know interactive, I know it's great. You know, how expert I am at anything, I don't know. The work, you can judge the work. But the biggest fan base, Rocketeer fan base I ever crashed into was the Imagineers today at Disney, because a lot of them are in their 30s. A lot of them, it's their and they all know Disney films because it's part of they wouldn't be there if they didn't love Disney, and they know the films of Disney. And it feels to me like The Rocketeer is one of the most beloved live action films, maybe of the era for sure, of the Katzenberg-Eisner era for sure. It wasn't when it came out, but now to walk in there and people handing me DVD boxes to sign of people who I admire, right? Because I'm a huge fan of the Imagineers and I'm a huge fan of the Disney parks. That was kind of awesome. And I even went into my bag of tricks. You know, Paul and I collected everything, and we had an assistant who would stash everything. So we have a storage space. We have all kinds of Rocketeer stuff. We have every piece of merchandise that was released back then, as well as things like the flying fold-up Rocketeer that Pizza Hut gave out.
Yeah.
If you guys don't have those, I would be happy to send you some, because we still have lots of. I can see a whole tub of this stuff right now because I've got it in my office at home.
Hal will be pulling up in front of your house very shortly. So
Can't talk. Gotta go. Gotta drive.
No, I will send you guys because. I will send you guys a few of these things. Just you'll send me the address. Anyway,
terrific.
Ask me some questions because I'm defocusing and I'm just going all over the place.
I just want to say you were talking about the flying sequence. We'll go off to different minutes, but the flying sequence I did appreciate. Even though you're never supposed to really get into direct exposition, you did a great job in just 2 lines. With Cliff climbs up into the he's there 5 minutes late for the air show, and he walks up to Bigelow and he said he says to Peavy, Malcolm hasn't been in a cockpit for 25 years. What's he trying to do? And he said he's trying to save your job, Cliff. But if he drifts into those race lanes, he's going to kill people.
Right.
And that it's like. You laid out the stakes for the audience who, hopefully everybody got it, but that lays out the stakes for what they're going to see in the next 5 minutes. So it was a nice direct line, but it just pulled you right in. It's like, oh, that's what I have to worry about now. Yeah,
and again, because I don't remember, I mean, was that in the comic? I don't know. I mean, it might not have been, but we certainly wrote it. Either way. It wasn't. I mean, it wasn't there as clear. And we did contribute in some way, I guess, Paul and I.
There, in this particular minute that we're watching, as Eddie changes sides, you do have a little bit of the Howard Hawks thing where Eddie points the gun and says, "Talk fast, Sinclair," and Cliff jumps in with, "You tell him, Eddie," and then Eddie turns back and says, "Shut up."
Nobody's confirmed yet as to whose side who's on, but
well, of course, and you guys have identified this. The fun part of that sequence was really what comes later, and it's that when it comes to an enemy of America, suddenly we're all on the same side, right? And that was a dynamic that was us for sure, and that whole that's what the whole change during that sequence there of gangsters versus our hero versus the Nazis. I mean, that was a lot of fun to play with, and that was in every version of the script.
Yeah, it just really, I mean, the script really sings at that point. It's just such a beautiful thing, and I can't really describe the wave that comes over the audience as they realize what's happening, but it's fun watching this with first timers watching. It's like going, oh, I get it, and it's just a really nice feeling when you're with other people watching the film in the dark. It's that's why you go to movies. I mean, this is it right here.
Such a nice touch as well to give Jenny the line about the secret room and the Germans on the radio, because Jenny is the damsel in distress in this picture, but only to a very, very modest degree. She never fully falls for Neville Sinclair and his seduction thing. She, even before she figures out there's something odd going on, she keeps him at arm's length. She's fooling him a bit after the whole chloroform sequence and everything else. It was really nice to give her a little bit of a thing at the end, and instead of just sort of whimpering wide-eyed, she's got a little bit of extra information to add to reinforce Cliff's story.
Oh yeah, I mean the strange thing about the Sinclair Jenny relationship was that we didn't write anything originally about Sinclair is actually falling for her. That was all the actor's idea, Timothy Dalton's idea, and it was not. I can tell you, who these people were to us. Neville Sinclair was Basil Rathbone as him at his most evil in certain films, and of course, Neville Sinclair and the whole Neville Sinclair gag, and that was completely created by Paul and I, was based on the rumor that Errol Flynn was a Nazi. I mean, that's obvious. Right. But that we just jumped off of that. And, when you read that stuff about people with the secret radio and the Hollywood Hills and stuff like that, that was all stuff we gathered from stories of the period and inspired that. But it was never our intention that Neville Sinclair, in the middle of this incredibly intense, call it a crime that was being committed, that he was somehow going to fall in love with her. That came from the actor, and we did our best to make that work. But that wasn't our idea at all. We thought, we're big believers in the good guy's only as good as the bad guy's is bad. And it doesn't mean that the bad guy should be one-dimensional. And some people could argue, well, it gave him more dimension. I thought it was a little silly that he would be, with all of the stakes of this, that he would be falling for her. But that's part of the collaborative process of making films. And it's also, when we're having podcasts 25 years later, I can say whatever I want because, I don't know, my career may be over anyway. But, I'm just saying, it's, I think the perspectives in the making of it and those things are interesting. And that's what I'll talk about, is how Paul and I felt at the time about some of these things. People can disagree with us completely, and we may have been completely wrong. It might be much better that he was swooning over her, but that wasn't our intention.
What was Neville's vanity part of the original script? Like the little bits. Like I'm part of the reason I'm understanding that he's kind of falling for Jenny is because it kind of proves his power over her. But just the little things like where he's cleaning out the spinach between his teeth and I'll give
you. Okay, so that's the great stuff that Tim was doing, and I'm sure that was Tim. That's really kind of very creative actor business that an actor of his quality, and he is a great actor, will add those kind of bits. That was not written in the script. Those are those little pieces of business that great actors bring to a role.
Speaking of actors, and then you looking back with hindsight, Danny, I want to touch back on something you brought up earlier, just very quickly. You talked about in your mind you had somebody like Joe Pesci in mind for Eddie Valentine, and then we talked about Alan Arkin, and both of them, neither Paul Sorvino or Alan Arkin brought that Howard Hawks pacing that you love so much. Did you ever have somebody else in mind, even as you were writing it? Did you have sort of a fantasy cast in mind for Peavy?
Sometimes we see people from other eras, and we just saw William Demarest. Peavy was William Demarest. Yeah, it was absolutely.
That really looks like him in the comics too. I never thought about that.
It actually is. It's Doug Wildey, as I recall, because Dave would draw from reference. As you know, Cliff looks like Dave Stevens in the comics. And I believe Doug Wildey, and this is just, I have to go back in my memory. I remember the name, and I believe he was a mentor of Dave's, and I believe he may have been I get a little confused whether he was an aircraft guy or a comic artist. I think he was a comic artist, maybe from the 50s, but I think he was one of Dave's mentors. But the name, absolutely, Doug Wildey, is who Peavy is drawn after in the comics.
Okay.
I don't have all the background on it, but it sticks in my head that was the name, and it's been a while, so I don't recall.
I've got to ask about Woolley and Fitch, too. I mean, I was always picturing Woolley and Fitch being James Gleason and William Demarest. That's how I would have cast them back then.
Well, look, Woolley and Fitch were G-men from the films that Paul and I loved. You want to hear some Easter eggs? There's a few in the film. Spanish Johnny is from a Bruce Springsteen song. I'm a huge Spanish Johnny.
I was not expecting that.
Spanish Johnny drove into the underworld last night, and you could it goes and goes and goes. And there's a couple of other. There's actually kind of an off-color one. Am I allowed to do off-color in here?
We can work around it. That's fine.
Nobody really picked up, and Disney didn't pick this up, and this is pretty off-color, but it's in there. The woman who runs the boarding house,
Mrs. Pye.
You get it now?
I didn't before, but I do now.
Okay, so that's one of those ones that, you know how the Disney artists sneak stuff into stuff and you go, oh my God. That was ours in The Rocketeer because we kind of got that slang from the actor and comic Tim Thomerson, who we did every single film we ever did except The Rocketeer, I think he appeared in. And yeah, Tim used to use that reference, and we slipped that in. And then there's a really stupid one, and the address of their house was our extension at Warner Brothers, where Paul and I, our office for many years over there. I think it was 1635. Yeah, you know that. Yep. Yeah. Our phone number at Warner's was 954-1635. That's just baloney. Mrs. Pie is a little more interesting, and Spanish Johnny is interesting to me because one of my best friends was Clarence Clemens in the E Street Band, so that was a little tribute to them.
No kidding.
Oh, okay. Well, now I'm going through the Goose, Millie, and Malcolm were all from the comic book.
Those were Dave's.
Yeah, those were
absolutely.
Dave's. And and then Mike Petey. I'm trying to remember the other guys besides Spanish Johnny that were in his gang.
Yeah, that's the one I remember because I wrote that in there, and nobody blinked.
It's a great line. Right. I mean, Spanish Johnny just as a name is perfect for
the period.
Yeah,
right?
It's like something out of the Sting. You know, I mean, the Sting had all the
fits right in there with Tommy Two Times and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's totally from the Springsteen song.
That's amazing.
Well, you got me on here. I got the
Keep them coming.
This is like the Ark of the Covenant thing. It's but listen, let's talk about this a little bit more tomorrow. We're gonna get further into an hour and a half into the movie at minute 90, but we'll pick some more of this up tomorrow on the show and finish up the week. So for folks who want to continue the conversation, we are always available on social media, all the usual places: Twitter, Rocketeer Minute. Facebook.com/Rocketeer Minute, the great big website, rocketeerminute.com, where you can catch up on all the previous episodes that we've been talking about this kind of stuff. And, watch. Also, you can go out there with some cool swag. You can order Blu-rays if you don't have a copy of this movie. I don't understand why you're listening to this podcast, but go out to Amazon, buy something, and Danny gets 12 cents for every Blu-ray that they sell. So make sure you
6 cents.
6. Okay,
I got to split it with Paul.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but yeah, get out there and buy some copies of that. There's all kinds of cool swag. Also, if you haven't signed up, go to iTunes or Google Play is the other one. You can get the last the final 20 episodes can be delivered to you hot and fresh every morning, Monday through Friday. But why don't we finish up the week here tomorrow? So join us here on the Rocketeer Minute. So until next time, over and out.
Get him, kid.